Hello, everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome. I am Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am a settler speaking to you from Toronto. While Business and Arts is a national organization with staff in several territories, excuse me, I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat people, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. I have a few housekeeping items to start with. We're happy to have Jenny Stevens with us for ASL interpretation and Andre Boulal providing live French interpretation in today's session. To enable these features, please click the interpretation icon in the Zoom toolbar and select your interpretation choice. Nous avons le plaisir d'offrir la traduction en direct en français pour cette session. Les instructions pour activer seront ajoutées à la boîte de discussion. Auto-generated English and French captions can also be turned on in the control panel. Only our guest speakers and I will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box. The session is scheduled for 1 hour, and the session is being recorded and will be distributed in a few days. Finally, I'd like to say a thank you to the Speaker Series supporting partner, RBC, and a very big thank you to our presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada, whose support enables us to bring these discussions to you. We're very grateful for Power Corporation's continued support and to have their Senior Vice President, Paul Genet, here with us today to say a few words of welcome and introduction for Minister Miller. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Aubrey, for the kind introduction and for your outstanding and consistent advocacy for the arts and culture sector. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. C'est mon grand plaisir de vous présenter l'Honourable Marc Miller, ministre de l'Identité et de la Culture canadienne et ministre responsable des langues officielles. M. Miller représente la circonscription de Ville-Marie, le sud-ouest Île-des-Sœurs à Montréal depuis 2015. Since his election to Parliament, the minister has held several major portfolios, including Crown Indigenous Relations, Indigenous Service, and Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. Avant d'entrer en politique, le ministre Miller exerçait le droit, se spécialisant en fusion et acquisition avec un accent sur le droit international et commercial. Il a travaillé à Montréal, à Stockholm et à New York. Il a également servi comme officier d'infanterie au sein des forces armées canadiennes. In Parliament, the minister has been an eloquent and passionate advocate for reconciliation, as well as for social equity and inclusive growth. To his great credit, Marc has worked extremely hard learning Mohawk, and in 2017, he made history by delivering a statement in the House of Commons in Mohawk, the first time the language had been spoken there since Confederation. Le ministre Miller est diplômé de l'Université de Montréal où il a obtenu un baccalauréat et une maîtrise en sciences politiques. Il est également diplômé de l'Université McGill où il a complété des études en droit civil et en common law. Indeed, Marc is extremely well educated, but that's only part of the story of his upbringing. His parents are both serious academics, his mother a respected archivist and his father a distinguished historian who ultimately became Dean of Arts at McGill University. He was raised thus with a strong sense of intellectual and cultural discipline, to say the least. In fact, he shared with me that his parents were the original CRTC at home. The only channel was CBC Radio-Canada, and it was on a black and white television until he was 14 years old. A little bit of a rich environment, but perhaps some would consider a little bit deprived. They were also somewhat skeptical of popular music. So at that age, Marc had only 3 vinyl LPs to his name. But I have to say, as I watch him take on the Canadian heritage portfolio, he is making up for any lost time. He's greatly diversified his consumption of the broad sweep of our arts and cultural scene. I have the privilege of attending many cultural events across the country, and I've rarely seen a minister so present. He shows up in cities across Canada and engages actively with the sector. So he's covering the breadth of our cultural landscape in a really impressive way. And to have Marc arrive at this important moment is very meaningful. beautiful. Many of us believe that in this complex and chaotic world, we have to embrace our Canadian history, who we are, and affirm the central place of arts, culture, and heritage in our identity and our sovereignty as never before as we chart the way forward. So, in that context, we're indeed fortunate to have such a culturally literate minister as our champion, one who is engaged, articulate, committed, and deeply passionate about the sector. So it's with great pleasure that I ask you to join me in welcoming Marc Miller. Je vous invite à vous joindre à moi pour accueillir le ministre Marc Miller. Merci, Aubrey.
Thank you so much, Paul. And good morning, Minister Miller. It really is a delight to have you join us today. And as you can see, the chat is going pretty crazy already with welcoming emojis there for you. So let's just dive in. There's been a lot of conversations in the past year since really the beginning of the Elbows Up era about what it means to be Canadian. From your perspective, where do arts and culture fit within that broader conversation about Canadian identity and strengthening the fabric of our country?
Well, thanks for that question, Aubrey. Nice to see this many people interested in this speaker series. Even though Paul gave a somewhat exhaustive intro to my extended biography, I'd say 90% of it is accurate, which is fatal in politics if it's not 100%. When I said I told him I had three vinyls to my name. It's three vinyls, I think, with my name on it. I didn't give him the details of it. I sang in a choir for 8 years.
Oh, amazing.
And so, they may not be in any of the official languages. They're in Latin. One of them was one of the composers was Gabriel Fauré. You will not see me distinguishing myself, and hopefully no one will ever see those vinyls. But my joke to Paul was that I was an artist early on in life because my parents forced me to sing in a choir. In addition to being, yes, the original CRTC with channels 2 and 6 readily available, and once in a while 10, 12, and if you had rabbit ears, 22. For anyone from Montreal now knows what I'm talking about, at least if they're 50 years old or more. Look, our stories are really who we are. They define our country. They make us feel proud, and they're intangibles. It's a know it when you see it and when you feel it as a Canadian. And they are ever more important in this moment that the Prime Minister has so clearly defined, particularly in his speech in Davos. But it's more than dollars and cents. And to the Prime Minister's credit, in all his efforts to diversify the economy, he has always highlighted the importance of the cultural sector, whether it's celebrating our beautiful past or celebrating the amazing creators in music, as quirky as Angine de Poitrine, or as commercially successful as Apathie that I'm making my way through, or Heated Rivalry. Maybe not for everyone, but certainly for a whole hell of a lot more people than we thought internationally. And yes, we consume this internally, but we also need to export it and have the rest of the world see more. But people's view, and I just was speaking to a friend in New York City that was his biggest takeaway from watching Heated Rivalry was to reflect that his country would not have put their trademark at the end, the logo at the end, supported by Canada, on a similar production that speaks about stigma in sport, especially as we, with a romantic story in line, but especially as we face our own challenges with toxic sports in Canada. And Jacob Tierney said it himself. If one of these shows makes a boy feel safe who's questioning themselves, maybe it's achieved something that perhaps never intended in the first place. Again, reflecting on who we are as the government, it's no surprise to anyone, particularly here, that we're not the most original folks. But what's been said to me time and time again is to trust instinct, and to embrace risk. And with the financial supports that the Prime Minister has doubled down on in the last budget and the current work that we're doing, it's quite obvious that this is a central aspect of the next steps in making sure that we're standing up for ourselves, including the oft-used expression "elbows up."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yet, despite growing national pride, we are living in a time of also growing polarization. I was looking recently at the 2026 Endelman Trust Barometer, which is an international measure of trust, and it was really showing a growing insularity mindset, both around the world, but also in Canada. And insularity is certainly can be a problem because it destabilizes public trust in leadership and undermines civic engagement. And there's often been discussions about arts and culture being important for both of those things, for civic engagement in particular. So what role do you see arts and culture organizations playing in strengthening trust and bridging divides at both the local level and maybe federally or nationally?
It's funny you should say that, Aubrey. And I won't immediately dismiss polls because I think we all feel that polarization, especially during COVID, but coming out of COVID. These weren't movements that came out of nowhere. The sense of polarization across, particularly Western democracies, but around the world, as there is a tension between more authoritarian regimes and what we have seen throughout, at least my generation, is the ideal of democracy as the best governing form. The genesis of that is quite complex, but what we can see is the fact that it's been supercharged over the last few years in particular. And I would also say, without pointing fingers, because it's important to point fingers inward when you look at the evolution of your own party and your own politics, that politics in general has, in my mind, political parties, political movements, regardless of the spectrum, again, have been defined and juxtaposed by the more zealous wings of those parties. And to the extent that we all fall short of the glory of God to some extent, we've been judged accordingly. And that is something that's worth reflecting on. I'm just looking at all the amazing folks saying greetings from all parts of the country. It's really amazing. And you can just tell that they're different, the different pop-ups. I hope everyone is getting the opportunity to see that because it's really heartwarming. But my thinking in all this is we're closer together than we think. And the role that I play in this particular moment is one that I accepted because of that. When the Prime Minister asked me to serve again after sitting on the bench for a few months, which is entirely his prerogative, the national unity aspect of this that he is very preoccupied by, whether it's expressed in the most singular distinctive forms in concern about referenda, whether it's in Quebec or in Alberta. Those aren't the only provinces or movements that have expressed that particular form of polarization. It's something that, and perhaps that's forged with his own experience in navigating Brexit, but that is something that does preoccupy the Prime Minister. It preoccupies this government, and well, it should. Western alienation is as much as a reality as it is a feeling. And if the central government isn't dealing with it, we're not doing our jobs. Whatever view you have on independence in Quebec, it's not new. But there are humans behind this that are expressing those feelings. And these movements are often contagious at times. So if the central government is not taking moves to bringing people together, we're not doing our jobs. Where that translates, I believe, in the arts and culture sector, is to highlight especially those beautiful things that bring us together. I am the member of Parliament, and I'm very proud of that, of a place where there have been 3 victories over the last few days by the Montreal Canadiens that have turned us into Canada's team. So these things are both small and big, whether we see a guy that has gone all the way to the moon, that is an incredibly educated man that is making us feel proud of who we are for the first time in a generation. That's amazing. I think back about my colleague who passed away, Marc, who has schools named after him, but was an immensely human person that brought the country together. So these can be done through systems, through fundings, through, we can talk about arts and culture and all the different funding envelopes. But at the end of the day, it's best expressed through people and how they see the country and how we see themselves and our hopes and dreams in them. And that's the reason I accepted this portfolio. It's because I had a small moment in time to help do what I got into politics for over 10 or 12 years ago, which is to help change the country and a country that I love and put it in a direction that I think is reflective of what Canadians are asking me to do.
Really great to hear. There's been a clear recognition that the cultural sector contributes not just socially, as you were just talking about, but economically as well. In your first week on the job, you referenced the economic impact data from the Artworks report that was published by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce this fall, that Business and Arts commissioned in partnership with the Canada Council for the Arts. How do you approach thinking about that dual role, both economic and social, when it comes to shaping policy and investment?
Well, we do have to distinguish them, I think, for intellectual analysis, Aubrey, but I think that it's too easy to separate them because they're intertwined. The numbers you see that I see in front of me, and I think they deserve scrutiny because they vary so widely, and depending on the sector you identify, can flip between $64 billion to $128 billion, so almost double. And that's really depending on what sector of the industry you're looking at it, what sort of multiplier you're applying to it, and what that actually means. It doesn't mean we should be skeptical of it because there's such a big delta and difference, but it does exemplify the trend of what the investments bring to the table. Not every investment yields a multiplier effect, and nor should we necessarily expect that, or should that be necessarily a category for what you invest in. But you ignore that at your own peril. Because for every person like me, for every minister like me, there are demands that go to the Minister of Finance and to the Prime Minister, and often justification are required. So if you can't demonstrate that those dollars are being put to good use, whether it's in tripling, doubling, quadrupling the yield or the contribution to the gross domestic product, or demonstrating some objective that is clearly defined, then you're failing at your job. There is tangible evidence that our export strategy can get better. There's an overly stereotyped tension in this field in particular among people that want to close in on themselves and people that are overly optimistic about what the future holds. That is epitomized in our discussion around artificial intelligence. I don't think either of those narratives are necessarily accurate, but you have to avoid those extreme polarizations of views to see that there is a middle that is worth supporting, and if you don't support it properly, it doesn't yield the results that you want it to yield. Our export strategy, I think, probably can improve. I visit, you may not consider this cultural, but EA does gaming, and it makes 88% of its revenue is made abroad. There's lots of reasons why it's established in BC, and those reasons are important, but they are a proud generator of revenue for themselves, yes, but also for the country. That isn't the only example, but leveraging our export strategy is something we need to do better. We just received renewed funding for the export strategy, which we have used to bring the cultural sector, for example, most recently to Mexico, but we will be planning on leveraging that. Not the $20 million is a ton of money every year, but we can do that in a better way because we see that economies that have done that and have gone out and shown Canada or their country to the world have had some incredible success. There is a very well analyzed example and probably overutilized example of South Korea, and I think of that because we just signed an audiovisual production agreement with South Korea that was a long time coming. But there are studies, and I read a recent article about the importance, for example, of um, and comparing Jurassic Park to the auto industry in South Korea, and studies in Japan that show that some of the work they're doing in and around audiovisual will outstrip their exports in the auto sector in a couple of years potentially. So these are not insignificant, and I don't think we should not look at them as sort of luxury items, but equally, if not as important as the auto industry and as the aluminum industry. And I think my reflection on this, I'm sorry to give you a super long answer, is we need to get better about defining exactly what that means, because the tendency within the sector, which has different actors, is to treat this in a more diffuse way than we probably should.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, first, I do think gaming can be considered part of the broader umbrella of arts, culture, and heritage sector. And we have seen some games recently that have been actually quite beautiful works of art. So I would agree with you there. But also, that's a really great segue to my next question about the fact that Canada really is having a moment on the international stage. You did mention the Davos speech, where other middle powers are really appreciating our values and looking to collaborate and trade with Canada. Canadian cultural exports have a role to play, as you just detailed, in creating connections and building trust with international partners. So the Spring Economic Statement did have a renewal and extension of the creative export strategy. So I'm hoping you can expand a little bit about how your department is prioritizing cultural diplomacy to project Canadian values abroad.
I'll answer this in French. It's important to realize, and sometimes we forget this, that the budgetary statements, whether it's a budget or a spring statement, these are documents that, of course, are full of economic information, but these are political statements from the government. And the appropriation of funds is done through the normal cycle of business or through Parliament. These are documents that show the vision of the government. And the economic statement was an important way to show Canadians that, yes, we had forecasts and we would have deficits that would be more important, and we reduced $11 billion, and it's through the economic circumstances. The last budget, which is the complement or the main document on which relies the spring statement, contain historical investments in arts and culture, especially with new funds or strengthening funds like CBC and Radio-Canada or Telefilm Canada beyond $500 million, especially in a context where the government wanted to tighten the budget. The economic statement of this spring does a couple of things. For the journalism sector, the announcement of a tax credit that will be broadened from its initial aspect to cover written press. So, and this is really important. This was something that was requested by the sector for equity, and that's been requested for a while. Second of all, the renewal of the export strategy, up to $20 million per year for the next 5 years with recurring money. And we thought that we'd see the end of this program, which is indispensable in our export strategy for Canada in terms of arts and culture. So we need to look at the program, how it was operationalized in the past years, and were we a complement with the Foreign Affairs Department? Should we work alone? There are efficiencies that we could achieve by working together. And with Global Affairs Canada, and also a reason to accompany certain people who want to export to other countries in a concerted way to make sure that the government supports them. So it's a revision that's ongoing. and maybe we won't bring any new changes, but I want to be sure we do the proper thing. And this is what I want to focus on for the next months when I'll ask my team to use these funds properly. This is great news for people who want to export arts and culture globally. We already see that there are there's results from our trip in Mexico. Sometimes it can take years to realize it was a success or not, because lack of success can also mean something. But for now, we have we have a great start. And when I was in Mexico City, all the people who are there and Canadians who are of Mexican origin, and they come back to their mother country to show what they produced and what they can create by creating natural alliances with Mexico. This is part of our effort in terms of diversification that the Prime Minister asked us to do, and he announced. And of course, it's for economic survival because of the behavior of our neighbor. That was my answer.
Okay, excellent. You briefly mentioned earlier the AI Summit. So there was an AI Summit in March at the Banff Center, bringing together quite a few leaders from the arts sector, but also tech and government, and quite a few universities as well. And the very important discussions about how artificial intelligence is rapidly transforming how culture is created, shared, and experienced. From your perspective, how do we ensure that Canada can support artists and cultural organizations through this shift as these technologies evolve?
Well, I think first, it's hard to have an unsuccessful conference in Banff because it is just a beautiful place and just an inspirational place, part of the country, to bring people together and talk about, the very uncertain future that AI is injecting into this conversation. Mm-hmm. I probably underestimated this because I know that I work well with my colleagues, but it's a long-standing sense that there's a tension between the classical Department of Heritage and the Department of Industry Canada. And perhaps there are competing interests at times, so let's not be naive, but it was important to that end to have both Minister Solomon and I on the stage talking from or singing from the same song sheet, not because we were told to, but because we believe it. Let's also admit that we don't have all the answers. The AI strategy that Minister Solomon will be deploying in short order needs to recognize the educational aspect of making sure people know what they're dealing with and the tools that they have available so that we can leverage this moment. Canada's skepticism, and again, polling beware, but the skepticism and mistrust towards AI in Canada in particular is quite high, even juxtaposed to other countries where it's relatively low, that you see early adoption. And so that's something that you have to be concerned about. And it isn't, again, by hiding under the sheets that you're going to dispel any myths. You have to get out there, learn about it, what it means, learn about the good sides and the bad sides. It's become quite obvious that the protection of the Copyright Act, La Loi sur les droits d'auteur, is indispensable as part of this. Any reform of the Copyright Act is something that takes a long time to do and requires industry input in all sectors, because it is so key to the basis of how people realize value in this in this sector, and in many sectors for that matter. It was also important to make sure that people had the opportunity to speak to themselves. So the best feedback, you love to get feedback that you had a great panel and you spoke well, and et cetera. But the best feedback I got was from panels that I didn't participate in. It was groups working together to see what the possibilities were in their industry and to make sure that they are clearly identifying the challenges and the opportunities related to the potential use of AI, as well as the concerns related to the abuse of AI. AI will, by its nature, and is, by its nature, disruptive. In the arts and culture industry that is seen is fragile. We can celebrate our strength, and we have strengths, but we are vulnerable, particularly in increased online presence. We've seen it. Many iterations. There's no need to rehash it today. But there are challenges, and there are challenges that we need to meet. And AI is here to stay, and how we use that will define whether we are swallowed by it or whether we are able to leverage it and control it. I think control in this is a very important word, because if you feel that lack of control, you get overwhelmed by it. So bringing people to one conference doesn't make a successful strategy, but it was important to bring two of the ministers most intimately involved in how we deal with AI in the next decade together, to make sure that we are talking to each other, that we are listening to the same people who are, in some cases, ringing an alarm bell, in others showing the immense possibility that can be realized with the proper use of AI.
We have a large number of questions in the Q&A box already, so I'm just going to give you my final question, and then we're going to turn to questions from the audience. So finally, thinking broadly, what gives you confidence or optimism when it comes to the future of arts and culture in Canada? What do we need most, and how can the leaders attending today's session help drive that momentum?
Audrey, everyone I meet gives me confidence. Canadians give me confidence. You see the amazing work going out there that you sometimes don't even realize is Canadian, just shining on the world stage. It's really, really inspirational. And you ask yourself, and you have to ask yourself as a politician, what is the role of the government in this, in supporting it and funding it? And is that use justified? If you're not asking yourself those questions as a politician, then you're not doing your job. But there's a lot of incredibly talented people, often not getting the support that is due to them, and often not getting the support that is due to them by the federal government. There are others that are making incredible use of the money that is provided to them, whether it's through different types of financing. It is also an industry that I see by talking to colleagues and talking to Canadians, that the role of the federal government is often misunderstood. If I tell them that we financed X program, it is surprising to them. If I tell someone that there is a vast tax credit ecosystem that supports all the amazing productions that are made in Canada, that leverages those productions 4 or 5 times what they would make without it, and allows builders and carpenters to build sets, people don't really grasp that ecosystem. So there's an educational role as well that needs to be appreciated. But as uncertain as the future is, I'm convinced that with the Prime Minister we have and with the strategy that we have, we can rise to this moment. And I see that in the diplomatic missions that the Prime Minister has taken, putting arts and culture at the front of this. Not only because it's inspirational, it's great to open up a widget plant. I mean, it's lovely, but it's much more inspirational to be blown away by the amazing talented artists that at least I got an opportunity to witness at the Junos a couple weeks ago.
Great. Okay, so as I said, we have a lot of questions from the audience. I'm not sure we'll be able to get through all of them, but we will do our best. I'm going to start with, we actually have two complementary questions. I'm going to try and combine the two together. You are also the Minister of Official Languages, and these two questions both pertain to it. So first, in French, est-ce qu'il y a du support
Is there
aux
support
arts
for francophone
francophones en
arts
milieu
in
militaire?
minority environments? Is it a priority for your department?
And then complementary, a question about support for minority English culture in Quebec. So how are you supporting minority languages across the country, essentially? Oh, you're muted.
This is a legacy from COVID. We're all on mute, and we speak for 5 minutes before being reminded that we're muted. So I'm unmuted now. So the reality is, yes, I'm Minister of Official Languages and therefore responsible of the strategy on bilingualism that was deployed. And we've deployed $4 billion. And often, when we talk about strategy on official languages, it's also a matter of investments in the minority French communities throughout the Canada. This includes arts and culture. And of course, festivals. I'm thinking about a festival in Acadie, in Acadia this summer, and we invest significantly to make sure that the Acadian nation can shine, especially in August when we celebrate this national holiday, which is important, le Grand Tintamarre. And this doesn't, it's not limited to this, but this is a concrete example of what's deployed through two envelopes. And when I wear my heritage minister hat, there are investments that are targeted by my department in the cultural sector to support theaters or others. And let's not forget this, because it will take an important part of the discussion. The Minister of Infrastructure will continue investing in cultural installations. And for languages, whether it's a theater or...
As for, well, I'm not going to scoop it, but I have an investment that I'm trying to find time to do it, but to roll out for the Centaur in Montreal. So it's not exclusive to one of the official languages, but both, and they are extremely important to who we are and making sure our stories have the opportunity to be shown. Because if you don't have a theater or a cultural center, it's impossible to show, at least as part of a live showing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. As we all know, we are currently in the CUSMA review process. Will the government commit to retaining the CUSMA cultural exemption? This person is writing, it's essential to protect our policy space. It's also vital to update the current definition of culture. And wondering if you can comment on that.
Sorry, it blinked. Just the audio blinked out for a second, Aubrey.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The question is about the commitment to the cultural exemption in CUSMA.
Yeah, sorry, it's a non-starter. That negotiation. I mean, the CUSMA. The reason we protect the cultural center, the cultural exception, is because it's non-negotiable, and there are times when we have to invest. We think that the measures that we have taken to protect Canadian content are not discriminatory in the first place. But when it comes to our cultural industries, we don't want a trade partner saying, well, you're not allowing this part of our culture to the detriment of Canadian culture come in. So, we're gonna exert a countermeasure. We don't want, for example, I can give you all sorts of silly examples, but we don't want you're somehow subsidizing your museums because of the Canada Strong Pass. I don't know. I'm giving it everyone would look at that and say this is absurd. It's not discrimination. There's every reason to do it. But in a country like Canada that owes it to who represent us to support our arts and culture, particularly, I would say particularly because we are uniquely placed to be heavily influenced by American culture. We need to be able to protect Canadian culture, and we need to be able to protect Quebec culture. That because of the real specificity of being a nation inside Canada, is sort of the canary in the coal mine when it feels encroachment on the cultural sector. So these are things we need to stand up for. We will stand up for, and we have a guy in Jean Charest on our recently formed committee who spent a good part of his political career as the Premier of Quebec, telling everyone and anyone that he would protect the cultural sector.
You also actually have Cameron Bailey, the CEO of TIFF, on that committee. So also a voice from our sector, which is really wonderful to see. Continuing on the trade discussion, the government has committed to bringing down trade barriers for goods and services to increase interprovincial trade. But what kind of policies can be put in place to better support the distribution of cultural content, particularly performing arts and exhibitions, in order to better share Canadian culture across this very vast country?
That's a great question. We can do more. There's this impression in this sector that there are two different worlds between the Anglophone sector and the Francophone culture. And culture is defined by language. It's not surprising that there is still this impression that we're in country, and the arts culture has two worlds that don't speak to each other. That's not exactly the reality. Just have to take a look at the importance of Quebec culture in heated rivalry. I just talked about this. The music that was at the forefront is incredible. And it's a fusion that fits well, and it's not even perceived. And the reality, which is another thing, another perception, and I don't want to negate it, we can do more efforts to make sure that we export within our country. Everybody can consume Acadian culture, and this is a request in the potential reform of CBC RADCAN. And we've talked about regional radios. We want to make sure that there are regional radios and for example, Acadian radios. The rest of Canada can hear them, their accent, the way they live. And this is a great example.
I may or may not be interested in what's going on because of my interests in certain parts of the provinces, but I think some people might be, and you might want to hear a local radio program from Northern Alberta or voices from Indigenous communities that haven't been heard enough, and in fact the opposite has occurred. They've been suppressed. So I think that is a real opportunity that we need to continue to lift up. I think one example of that that has been pointed out to me is the importance of the Canada Strong Pass that has really pushed more kids into museums, and particularly when we're in an era of trying to get kids off their phones, making sure they're getting out to our national parks, making sure that we're taking vacations within Canada. We've seen some of these campsites across the country being completely oversubscribed. Making sure they're getting into our museums that need that volume. And I saw an outstanding exhibit on dinosaurs in the ROM. I would encourage everyone to do it. And my kid phoned me up the other day and wants to go see a dinosaur exhibit in Calgary. This is cool, and we should be pushing and thinking and not taking the easy path of saying, well, we'll just go to a water slide or something and call it a day. Not that water slides aren't great, but there's plenty of things to do in this country that are great for the brain and gets us off our phones.
Excellent. So, Minister Miller, we have seen a growing disparity between large, well-resourced arts institutions and smaller grassroots community-led organizations. It's often these community-based groups that are introducing young people to the arts for the first time and building the trajectory for long-term participation. Within your mandate, do you see a role for the federal government in rebalancing support to ensure the full ecosystem can really flourish and potentially encouraging larger institutions to rely less on ongoing public subsidies over time?
I do think we have to ask ourselves whether you need federal government support if you're starting to make money. It's not a hard and fast rule, because there are festivals that have a for-profit component that also, I'm just thinking of the Jazz Fest in Montreal that attracts a ton of people. So with some people may argue that may not need support. I disagree with it. There are a lot of free events that are offered as part of the Jazz Fest, and jazz needs to be accessible to everyone and not sort of a well-heeled tourist that we're glad to see take advantage of a beautiful city and the jazz scene, but can afford the more expensive tickets. Whereas you walk down and you feel the atmosphere of Montreal in the Quartier des Spectacles, and you see some open shows that are free for everyone. So it's not a black and white answer. My department has some of the most important buckets of funding for small organizations. But those organizations often need a lot of interaction and hands-on with the government. So it is not as easy necessarily to deal with a smaller organization than a larger one, but I think we have to take the time and the care to do it. There are lots, so I'm not going to disagree with the premise because I want to examine it more. This department, compared to other departments, does fund a lot of small projects, a lot across the country. And I was in Iqaluit a few weeks ago and saw someone that was running something out of a small home, teaching language in Inuktitut, and cultural ways that have been disappearing over time. And that's as small as it gets, where every dollar counts, and that needs to continue. But always willing to examine that premise, because even though I don't agree with it entirely, I do think we have to be giving some thought to it as we look at where the money is going.
Well, the biggest and arguably the most efficient mechanism for distributing money to those smaller arts organizations, but as well as individual artists, is—
Can I guess what that is?
The Canada Council.
No. I would have won the bet you were going to say that.
Yeah. So we have a question from a member of the Canadian Arts Coalition. Will the government provide a boost to funding the Canada Council in the next federal budget?
I would encourage more of those questions, and because I keep getting them, and I'm not against them, because if I had the choice right now, I would absolutely fund the Canada Council for the Arts. The work that is done is amazing. Let's not ignore the significant boost that the Canada Council for the Arts has received over the last few years. It has been significant. Is it enough? I'm not arrogant to say that it is, or presumptuous for that matter. But it's something that I am working on. I would like to see more money go into the Canada Council for the Arts. But it would be irresponsible for me, one, to promise it, and two, to say that it's going to happen. It'd be not only irresponsible, but unfair for anyone listening to this. I have some work to do to see what can be done. How we do it is equally important. Is it fair to everyone in the country, across the country? That's another question we do have to ask ourselves. The reason the Canada Council for the Arts does such a great job is because it is relatively independent from me, and it is composed of a great group of folks that are making sure that that is getting to the right person. And we talk a lot about institutions, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people, and that's my greatest preoccupation: is are the people getting the money that they deserve and they work so hard for, whether it's for you know any artistic proposal or other, and are we doing this in the right way? And I'm willing to examine that with the Canada Council. But funds are indispensable, and I won't deny it. I just can't give you that satisfaction today, other than to say that's where I would love to see the money go. But that's a discussion that I have to have with the Minister of Finance, with the Prime Minister, but also in competition, to be honest, with several dozen other ministers that have a lot of priorities.
Appreciate that there's a lot of negotiation within government to be able to secure that kind of support. During the spring economic update, there was a big focus on skilled trades. That was pretty clearly aimed at having the talent to build homes and other infrastructure. We do have a question here about the fact that there are actually a lot of skilled trades in arts and culture, namely a lot of the tech crews that work both in live performance, film and television, and behind the scenes in all sorts of institutions. So these skilled trades are critical to ensuring Canada has the talent to produce our top creative products that we want to be able to have for audiences here at home and to export. So has the government considered a broader definition of skilled trades and ways to support these labor issues in our sector?
Aubrey, the intention of the funds that were announced in this spring economic statement was to make sure that we were providing support for people to increase their skill set. And that will include the carpenters that build sets, yes, and it will include people that are sound engineers that are looking to. It isn't sort of, even though bricks and mortar is important, that is work that we will continue to do under the leadership of Patty Haidu to make sure we are being as inclusive as possible. I can't at this point, like if you give me a definition of someone, I wouldn't be able to tell you whether they would be eligible unless it was really obvious, because that's work that needs to be done. But if we're gonna train 100,000 people in the next few years, there'll be a significant segment of that will be working in the cultural spaces, particularly if we're building the theaters and amphitheaters that we are looking at building, or cultural centers that are distinct from sports centers, not to be confused. It will require specialists that want to build up their skill set, and that means, it means more support from us, but also it means ultimately at the end of the day, those people will be making more money for the skill that they've trained at.
Excellent. Well, that's good news to hear. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. So I want to say an enormous thank you to you, Minister Marc Miller, for joining us here today and for sharing the government's priorities and giving such thoughtful responses to all of our audience questions. We really are deeply grateful for this level of transparency and collaboration with our sector. It's a great start to having you in this role. Thanks as well to our ASL interpreter, Jenny Stevens, and French interpreter, Andre Boulal. Many thanks to Paul Genet for joining us, and to Power Corporation of Canada as our presenting partner of the Business Arts Speaker Series. And we'd also like to thank our supporting partner, RBC. And finally, thank you to everyone who joined us today, and for your questions and your comments in the chat. If you want to learn more about any of the business and arts programs and events, please head to the website businessandarts.org for more information, or you can follow us on social media. So many thanks and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.